Hey guys, and welcome to this week's video, which is going to feature a lot of overcompensating voiceover for my terrible planning in hopes to not make this video complete smoking hot garbage. Today we are going to be going through the process of how I made my generically medieval 15th century red wool kirtle, which is your base layer as a woman in this time period. It creates my bust support, it's the fashionable shape, the base layer, all of it. I used a bunch of illuminated manuscripts to kind of get my main inspiration for style. Red was extremely popular in the medieval period, up through the Renaissance as well, and so you can see some lovely illuminated manuscripts here of women wearing red wool kirtles or gowns. I drafted my base bodice block using this is hilarious, 1960s pattern drafting manual, and then I just adapted it to kind of work for a kirtle. I did a couple of mock-ups to kind of get a rough idea over how I wanted it to look, and then from there I had my base pattern, which by the way I can no longer find in my sewing room, that's how messy it is, and began drafting it out on the wool. My intention was to create very geometric, basic shapes using leftover bits of fabric to create gores, to have fullness in the skirts. And so what you're watching me do right now is ride the struggle bus. I've started the initial drafting out with everything and it's not going to work in the most economical way, so I'm gonna redo everything. I just need to adjust my bodice pieces just by a little bit. Almost there, just some tweaking, because I want this to be as economical and its cutting as possible. I don't want to waste any fabric. All right, trying again. Let's rub out these mistakes because it wasn't working. It really didn't work. And it literally took me all afternoon to get this to work. Then I still kept messing it up. Spoilers. I said this in my Instagram post when I posted the video that I wasn't really happy with how things came out. You know, there's mistakes made and things like that. And part of it was just how to handle this very extreme movement from my waist to my hips in a way that was flattering and didn't make me feel like a stuffed sausage. Because the first few variations of this kirtle, I definitely felt like a sausage. So constructing a kirtle is actually very straightforward. It's not difficult at all. It's a very simple garment to make. It's just extremely time consuming if you're like me and you want to sew it entirely by hand. This kirtle is only 4 pieces. It's 2 back pieces, 2 front pieces, and then I included 2 gores at the side seams to help create fullness in the skirt so that way it flared out away from my waist and down to the floor. The circumference of this skirt is huge. It's over 4 yards around. It's massive, but it's very easy to make it. Like I said, it's just time consuming. Okay, so this is continuing to be a bigger challenge than I thought it would be, but I did not have as much fabric as I thought I did. So what I'm having to do now is I'm having to actually cut my back at the different cross grain than my fronts to make this work. This is frustrating and it's gonna be probably pretty visible in just the kirtle, but at the same time, historically, doing this kind of stuff is normal. Having something cut a certain way to make it work and be economical in fabric and making less fabric work and piecing, you know, it's all normal. So I haven't measured it yet, but just by eyeballing it, I think I'm gonna be able to get my back pieces out of this one piece. Thank God I'm short. There's literally just enough. Just enough. I'm talking an inch. I'm so lucky. I'm so freaking lucky. Oof. Good morning. It is, I think around 8, yeah, it's like 8:05 a.m. I'm still in my like morning clothes, but I wanted to pop on here and say that this morning I am going to cut out, well, I don't know if I want to say cut out, but I need to draft out my, what's that word? Interfacing, my interlining and my facing for my kirtle for the neckline. and the center front, and I want to go ahead and just get that kind of patterned and out of the way before I start hand stitching everything else. So I'm gonna get that like kind of drafted up and just do, I might even draft my sleeves today, get that, and then work on my side seams and stuff like that. So on my pattern, I measured in about an inch or so, traced that shape out, and you can see the dark line that I'm tracing over now with gridded paper. And that's how I created my facing for my eyelets and around my neckline. So that way I'm not wasting fabric and it can be very simply done. And then I'm going to take that shape that I'm gonna cut out, and I'm gonna cut that out of linen as well as red silk taffeta. And that's gonna be the facing for my kirtle. So that's how I'm gonna do my eyelets and around my neckline. I also ended up doing a silk and linen facing around my sleeves, at the cuff of my sleeves, up to the buttonholes and buttons. Again, just for structure and a nice finish too. So you know how do I explain this? There's always something to learn in sewing, right? I've had a tracing wheel for a while now. And I just thought that these little pokers mark the holes. And sometimes it works, you know, but sometimes it doesn't. And then I realized that you're supposed to use tracing paper to mark the holes. And I somehow managed to actually find tracing paper that I somehow bought at some point in time, I don't know when, just in my sewing room. So I've been using my tracing wheel and my tracing paper to mark my pattern pieces on their stitch lines from the underside. And guys, it's life-changing. 10 out of 10, highly recommend. And for those of you all who didn't know this, you are today's years old when you learned that that's what this is actually for. And for those of you who knew, well done you. Don't judge me. We're fine. So this is the very first variation of the gores that I sewed into my kirtle, and they did not work. Spoilers. They were not long enough and they were not full enough to go around my midsection in a way that was comfortable and flattering. But this is also how I constructed them. So the technique is the same. I took the gores and I lined them up and I pinned them into place. And what I've done for this garment is I actually marked all of the stitch lines in ink. And so I'm matching up the stitch lines because the seam allowance can be a little wonky, especially for the gores, because this is kind of what's left over. LOL, they didn't do anything, but anyways. So I'm pinning those into place using the stitch line as marking. Now, my mistake is I thought I had marked my waist, because I actually marked notches in my waist, but it didn't work out. I spent an inordinate amount of time stitching up full back stitches, which was a huge mistake, of these gores to then try it on, only to find out that it did not fit well. And I did this actually a couple times, and I ended up calling Morgan for help. All right, everyone, it is Sunday early afternoon, and last night I spent the evening putting in my new gores and redoing the basting stitches to kind of where I think it should be now for the kirtle. Now I need to try it on and hope everything fits the way it's supposed to. It was close when I fit it last weekend, but it was a little bit too sausage-tastic for me.
I look like I know what a JPEG is. I just want a picture of a goddamn hot dog.
And so I ended up calling Morgan Donner and WhatsApp, like video chatting with her, getting her input and some advice, because she and I have slightly similar body types, and obviously she is much more experienced with medieval clothing than I am, and so I decided to pick her brain. So now I need to try on the kirtle and see if I like it, if I need to make any other adjustments. Hopefully not, because I just kind of want to get into back stitching this and getting it done, because I am running so behind on my self-imposed schedule. Hashtag that YouTuber life. Okay, so let's get modern clothes off, get into historic clothes that are now covered in dog hair, so. Well done, self. So this is the second variation with the fixed gores that are much, much larger and much fuller, which are the gores I ended up going with, but yeah, I still messed this up. Like, guys, I literally put these gores in like 3 or 4 times, and there are still threads sticking out of my gores because they just, it was such a pain. I cannot express how much of a pain in the backside this was. What I had done originally was I was backstitching everything, and then I realized how stupid that was and inefficient. The bodice part of my kirtle, where there's a lot of pressure, especially where I'm lacing, that is all backstitched very tightly with about 10 to 12 stitches to the inch. But the gores and skirts, I actually did running back stitches for those. I totally put my gores in the wrong place again. Putting them at the hips instead of at my waist. Shit. That was real dumb of me. As much as I'm annoyed with myself for putting my gores into the wrong place, at least I know this is gonna work. I'm much happy with the fit. I'm gonna bring it in just a little bit more at the sides and then raise the gores up to where they actually belong. And then I'm going to actually just fully commit, because even at this current state right now, even though it's not exactly perfect, I could wear this and be completely fine with myself. So that to me means I'm gonna make my couple of little baby adjustments, and then I'm just gonna just go for it. And hopefully I'll put the gores in the right place this time. That's annoying. It's really annoying. What I like to do, and what I did for this, is I actually did tiny back stitches from the underarm to my waist, and then basically once the gore started to flare out, I switched my stitch from a back stitch to a running back stitch. And a running back stitch is a back stitch followed then by 2 or 3 running stitches, followed then by another back stitch. And what you want to do with that is you want that to be in a fluid motion. You don't want your back stitches or your stitching to be very jerky, if you will. Speed and finesse in your hand sewing comes from fluidity of movement. And so that's why having a good technique is important, because if you don't have a good technique, then you can't become fluid. If you can't become fluid, then you can't refine your stitches, and then they don't go quickly, and then you get frustrated, and then you quit, and so on and so on and so on. So the size and spacing of your back stitches and your running stitches are going to be dependent upon your needle as well as the weight of the fabric you're using. This wool is very chunky, and it's beautiful, and it's soft, and it's moldy, like not molded, but like it molds well to the body, and it's great to work with. It's very forgiving to work with, but you cannot do really tiny stitches fluidly. Like, there's going to be some space there, and that's okay, because in the skirts, there's no pressure. It shouldn't matter that they're not super close together in the stitching. And that back stitch is going to help lock everything into place. So if you do somehow pop a stitch, that back stitch is going to help prevent it from fraying out more. So a running back stitch is a fantastic option on seams that do not take a lot of pressure. And so I switched from doing back stitches in the bodice to running back stitches in the skirts, and it worked really, really well. Once my seams were stitched and gores were stitched, I pressed everything open, and then I overcasted it all down, so that way the raw edge of the wool is secured and the skirts to help prevent fraying. This wool actually has a pretty decent cut edge, even though it's not a broadcloth. I'm not really too worried about it, but just for extra security, extra strength, and an extra nice finish, I actually overcasted everything down, and that also took ages. Once those were set in, then it was time to move on to the facings. I took Morgan's advice as well, and I added some linen to create as a lining essentially for the kirtle. It's not required, but when you're a busty lady, it does help to have a little additional structure. So I did end up opting to add this linen lining in. I've stitched in the facings, they're beautifully sewn in, and I have to mark the eyelets. A spiral lacing like this is, so long as you kind of have your initial measurements correctly, you can eyeball it. And I do kind of partially eyeball it once I kind of have everything settled, but you can see here I was being extra careful because this is so visible that I wanted to make sure everything was as perfect as possible, so that way it wouldn't look super wonky and it would lace up nicely. This is how I sew my eyelets. I like to use double buttonhole twist, heavily waxed. I poke the hole and then I actually stitch it this way so that way I can control the circles around the eyelets. I don't do a buttonhole stitch. You don't really actually see that in historic garments. You just see it whipped. And honestly, my eyelets are really oversewn. They're a lot nicer than historic examples are. And then I just finish the facing. Since the skirt is basically on the bias, I hung it up for 24 hours to make sure that that wool really stretched out before I put in the hem. And the way that I did the hem is I just cut off the excess that had stretched out. And then I took a wool braid, and this is actually the hat braid from Burnley and Trowbridge. I'll put the link in the description below. I folded that in half over the edge, and I was able to pin it in a way that the back was up higher than the front. And so I'm able to stitch the braid in this tape in one hem stitch motion because I'm catching it on the back side. So it's nice and even and pretty on the front. The inside of it isn't quite as nice, but no one sees that, so I don't actually care. And so I'm able to do that in one fluid motion. I don't have to stitch it twice, which is just chef's kiss perfection here. You see wool being used as a hem for wool garments and other garments. The Queen's Servants by the Tudor Tailors has some great research here, and so I was using their advice. And also, double folding wool is just not always a good idea. It can get super duper bulky, so I like to either bind or face when I'm working in wool, and that's a normal historic technique as well. And yeah, this months went by, guys. Months. It snowed.
Hey, so it is December 1st, 2:20 in the afternoon. I spent, I kid you not, all damn day on these buttonholes yesterday. So much so that when I finally got to the point that I was like, oh, I'll film how I sew the buttonholes so that way like people can watch that part, it was dark outside. So that's why there's no buttonhole footage. But to be honest, also like these buttonholes, like my left sleeve buttonholes are worse than my right sleeve buttonholes, even though my left sleeve buttonholes were the buttonholes I did second. They should be better, but they're not. Anyways, so it's now 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I've had other stuff to do this morning. And so now I have to make and sew the buttons. And then once this is done and I finish facing the inside of the sleeve and I face the cuff of the sleeve in silk, then it's time to set the sleeves in this kirtle. So hopefully I can beg Nicole to come over and spend about 30 minutes doing that for me today because you guys are supposed to be watching this on Sunday, right? Sunday the, like, what, 6th? Yeah, Sunday, December 6th. I haven't even started editing this video yet. Who would have thought that a kirtle would take this long? I didn't. I thought I would have been completely done with this project by now. Joke's on me, I guess. This is what I've done so far for, it's not obviously sewn in, but this is just a piece of linen. This is gonna fold over, so the linen's doubled up, so that way this is just reinforced a little bit more when it comes to like pressure for the buttons. So, and then I'm gonna make the buttons and I attach them as I make them because the buttons are actually sewn together as like just a circle of wool and then gathered up and then I attach them. There's 16 buttonholes, so I'm gonna make 16 buttons. The buttons don't take as long as the buttonholes, thank good. So I should finish the kirtle today, which means that I have tomorrow to do the finishing shots and video and then start editing the video. And I have to be honest, guys, I am feeling very Rachel Maxey right now. And I don't know how she does it because this is really stressful for me. So let's just all take a moment to appreciate how much Rachel Maxey like kicks butt in her videos, because to do this in a week is just cuckoo bananas. I still like don't have a wimple. Well, I made a wimple, but it doesn't fit with my neckline, and I'm not happy with the neckline of this. I'm just gonna put that out there. So I need to make a new wimple. I guess maybe I could use it as a veil, but I think it's too small to be used as a veil. So I have to make a new veil and a new wimple. Ah, make a kirtle, they said. It would be fun, they said. All right, I'm gonna stop talking to you guys because this is just me actually wasting time at this point, and I'm gonna make buttons. And hopefully I'll remember to get some content before it gets too dark outside and you can't see anything.
Do I have something on my face? Oh, I do. To make the buttons, though, I did enjoy this process. I cut out a whole slew of circles because I wasn't sure how many I would need, and I ended up doing 16 buttons and buttonholes on my sleeve, and it basically goes from my wrist to just before my elbow, and they're spaced out about a ½ inch apart. And to make the buttons, I took my little discs using very heavy linen thread, heavily waxed. I did a couple of running stitches where I folded the raw edge over about 3/8 of an inch to a 1/4 of an inch, but more about 3/8 of an inch. I did a couple of running stitches, gathered that up, pull it nice and taut, and then stitched the button together with the raw edges on the inside, and those raw folded edges are actually what holds the button shape. So I'm not using stuffing or a bead or anything like that. Like, it's just the fabric that's holding this button's shape. And so they're pretty fun to make, and they're pretty quick once you get used to it. And then the leftover thread, because there was always enough thread, I would actually use that to create my shank. I would take a stitch through the sleeve, bring it back up through the button, up to the top, back down, and then I would do buttonhole stitches around the shank to help strengthen the shank and hold that shape. And then once the buttonhole stitches went all the way down to the bottom, I would do a couple of back stitches to lock everything into place. It holds the button straight up and is nice and secure. And then I would just lock that off and hide the thread. Then all of those stitches are actually hidden when I put the silk facing on, so it has a nice, clean, beautiful finish on the inside. I do not have any footage of the sleeve, guys. I'm so sorry. It was super late at night, and I went to go draft my sleeve pattern, and I go, and I'm starting to draft it, and I'm like, wait, how did they do their sleeves in the medieval period? Did they do them this way? I feel like this isn't how they did them. Then I went to go look at the Medieval Tailor's Assistant book, which I have issues with, full disclosure, and they were saying that the seams were towards the back, which is actually just like an 18th century sleeve. So then I went to go look for my 18th century sleeve shapes because I have like 5 of them, and I couldn't find any, not a one. So then it was a quick message to Nicole going, hey, can you come over here and cut one on me real quick? And she was like, I'll do you one better. I'll just bring my pattern over and we'll see how that one fits and then you can copy it. And I was like, sweet, that works for me. And so she came over at like 9 o'clock at night, and this is why I love her and why I'm glad we're neighbors. And I threw on hers and we were like, yeah, this is good, this will do.
I apologize for the laughter and the movement.
Careless, my love, you do me wrong to kiss me.
If you get low, you can squat low like